So anyway, Paul, again, is with PCS Advisers. He's a managing partner there, which is an employer healthcare benefits consulting firm based in Northern California. And, Paul, as I was mentioning, healthcare workers, and this is according to a Chartis executive in an interview with NPR, the Chartis executive said the hospitals they work with have really high vaccination rates every year for the flu shot, and yet for any three of the COVID-19 approved for emergency authorized use by the FDA, again, none of these vaccines have official approval by the FDA. I think we should mention that. But in rural hospitals, a large percentage of these healthcare workers, even though they've had access to these vaccines for months now, have chosen not to get the shot. What do you know about that, and what can you tell me?
Well, in fact, while these studies note the rural ones, there's other evidence of that in some of the urban markets, too. Certainly early on in the pandemic, Kaiser Family Foundation did a study, and they're a pretty respected organization for this kind of information, and 30 to 40% of healthcare professionals were at that time stated they were not going to get the vaccine.
So basically a third.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, around the country, a third. So that lines up with the Kaiser Family Foundation study that encompassed all types of markets. We see in Riverside County in California, I think it was as high as 50%, 40% in L.A., 60% in Ohio earlier on amongst healthcare workers. So it's a widespread issue all around the country, and I think we're victims of our own politicization of this. It's a hard word to say. I think I got it that time.
I think you did.
So we've made this thing very political, and some of the very people who were saying they would never get the vaccine, that the prior administration was rushing it and stuff, then got on camera taking it, saying everyone go take it, it's safe and good for you. And so I think that's my big takeaway from all of this, is that we've done I hope we can learn from this, that we just need to give people the facts.
Well,
and explain why it's safe, if it is safe. And it is. It's a medical marvel, really.
You think it is safe?
Well, I think it's...
Again, none of these vaccines have been officially approved by the Food and Drug Administration. They've all had emergency authorized use.
True.
So, and any other vaccine has to go through the rigors of all kinds of checks and balances before it even rolls out to the general public. This thing was at least, and you can pick your reason, but this thing was at best rushed through, and there's this huge sales pitch going on around the country, mostly paid by pharmaceutical workers and federal tax dollars to get people to roll up their sleeves and take the shots. We feel like we're being sold a bill of goods, a bunch of us here, and there's no proof that this is long-term safe, any of these, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, or Moderna.
Well, even had they gone through it at their normal pace, that's still true, unfortunately, and that, of course, contributes to the hesitancy that exists pre-COVID with vaccines and pharmaceuticals in general. We're always running around 30 or 35% of the population, even before COVID, that's what we would call vaccine hesitant. And the real test is a test of time with any of these types of things. We already know from the reporting that comes in that there's a vaccine adverse effect reporting system that 1 in 60,000 people could have a fatal event from this. That's the way the numbers have been tracking so far.
Well, my issues, Paul, are the fact that, they can say in their limited trials that there's 90 to 95% effective, but these don't legally fit the definition of vaccines, any of them. These mRNA shots.
Yeah, this is all new technology. You've got the mRNA technology that's new, which is how it was gotten to market so quickly. It doesn't require some of the same more time-consuming elements that are involved in the way we manufacture.
But it's not a vaccine like a polio vaccine or a smallpox or even a measles vaccine. It's not a vaccine. To call it a vaccine is a stretch.
That's true. It's not, the old-style vaccines were a weakened or a deadened version of the actual virus. that then gets put into the patient, and then they develop antibodies. In these cases, we have a couple of different ways we're accomplishing it. The J&J and the AstraZeneca are one form, and then you have the mRNA type. In both cases, what we're doing is tricking the body into thinking the virus is in there, using the spike proteins and using our own bodies to generate these spike proteins, and there's all kinds of science around that and behind that. But you're correct in saying it's new, and so we're going to, there's some hesitancy around it. I think one of the big things that we're missing in this whole conversation that plays into this is we're acting as though these, let's say it's 20 or 30% of healthcare workers that don't want to get this vaccine. Let's say it's the same for the wider population, because that seems to be through all this marketing. We've gone from 40+% of Americans that are saying they don't want to get the vaccine down into around 25%, let's say.
All right.
And there's all kinds of medical experts that get on the mainstream media and say these people are going to prevent us from getting to herd immunity.
That's a fallacy. That's a fallacy.
That's an absolute fallacy. There's no science behind that. You can get the disease itself and get immunity.
Yes.
And then you also don't spread it, and you don't, the percentage of people that get it twice, all the studies they keep doing confirm.
I've tested positive. I've tested positive for the antibodies. So is my wife. We're not getting the vaccines.
Yeah, well, we all had it at my house, too, and so that there's no medical reason for us to get the vaccine either.
Exactly, but they're pushing this. Even if you get the vaccine, or even if you tested positive for antibodies, you've got to have the vaccine. Isn't there a kernel of truth, Paul Seegert, to the fact that they have supply that is outworking demand, and they got to get these shots into people's arms? There's
no question. When you look at that, we purchased, and part of it was strategic in that we didn't know which vaccines would work out. But if you look at the U.S., Canada, European Union, and UK, collectively we've all purchased, depending on which country you select, 4 to 6 times more vaccine than our population, and enough for double doses where needed of all those. So it's a huge glut that we've created of this vaccine. And so then you hear CEOs of some of these companies coming out and saying you're going to need a third shot and then an annual booster and all this kind of stuff, when the CDC's own research tells us, and they're some of the most conservative in this information I'm about to share, 8 times more of us have had COVID asymptomatically than had COVID confirmed.
Yes.
And we're at 32 million confirmed.
So 8 times, we're talking about 260 million Americans have been exposed to this or had this. We are already at the technical standpoint of herd immunity in this country, if that is true.
Yeah. So when they say case counts continue to fall, hospitalizations continue to fall, all the indicators are trending the direction you would expect with getting into that stage of herd immunity, and yet nobody wants to talk about it because we really want to keep the urgency up on the vaccines. And that's where I'm back to saying, hey, let's give people the facts. There's studies out there by all the respected organizations, or numerous anyway, that show if you had the disease and you have the antibodies from that, you are more protected than if you got the J&J vaccine, and maybe slightly less than if you got the Moderna or the Pfizer. But I had another media outlet say to me, you get 4 times more of the antibodies in your system if you get, say, the Moderna vaccine than if you had COVID itself. Well, how many do you need? If you got the antibodies from having the disease and you don't get it again, isn't that enough?
I would think so.
It might be simple, but that seems enough to me.
Now, Paul Seegert, we're talking to Paul Seegert tonight on the Nightcap from PCS Advisers. Do we know what's going on in the country of India? Because they have this incredible surge of cases and hospitalizations and deaths in the subcontinent right now that is kind of in the face of what we are experiencing in America. Do we know what's going on in India?
Well, they only have 1.5% of their population or so that's been vaccinated. And part of what's playing into this is, are we benefiting because some folks have chosen to get vaccinated here? Yes. That speeds up the process to getting to herd immunity. And if you look at countries like Israel, where they've gotten to, say, 60% have gotten at least one dose, 48% in the UK, they're able to let go of the lockdowns, and things are fine.
Israel's at 0.1% positivity rate right now.
Yeah, because they've got enough momentum with vaccination and infection and then by the time you get there, the people that have been vaccinated tend to be the high-risk people. When they say we're at the bottom of the sixth inning with this thing in the U.S., my question is, if we got another big wave, so to speak, but all the at-risk people were vaccinated, does that wave matter in the same way? And the answer is no. It's not going to have the same impact. And in India, to get around to that, you've got a point and a half that have been vaccinated, and so what they're having to do is get there more through actual illness, spread of the illness itself.
Yeah, well, that's the way most viruses eventually go by the wayside, as you know, Paul, is that people get sick, they get over it. The ones that don't sadly die, but, and again, the death rate from COVID-19, at least in the United States, is still very, very low, and it was even at the peak, was it not?
Yeah, that's correct. And we also seem to, just give people the facts, kind of back to that point of mine, is the folks that were in that high-risk category, 78% of the people that were hospitalized, regardless of age, that were hospitalized and then maybe even ended up succumbing to the disease and dying, were overweight or morbidly obese. They were,
yes.
They had risk factors from their lifestyle. I think it would be a very productive thing as a country to turn on this massive media power that has created so much fear, where when you poll people, they think there's a 40 to 50% chance they're going to get hospitalized if they get COVID, which is not at all accurate. Turn that power on and let's start educating people on how to live a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah,
and we won't have to deal with all this.
If we'd had the Peloton push we've got right now in 2018, a lot more people might be alive.
Exactly.
Paul Seegert.
Exactly.
Paul Seegert, thank you very much for your time this evening. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. Thanks for being had.